Okay, this is it. I am doing the video. Now, if you've been around on my channel, then you know that I'm pretty open about my struggles with chronic illness. But a question that I frequently get asked is, how do you manage chronic illness and being an artist and having an art business? And I think this is a very difficult question to answer, and it's a difficult one to reflect on for me. So I've always kind of just skirted around it, but let's finally talk about it. Let's talk about my illness and my diagnosis journey, how it's impacted my art practice, and ultimately the creative routine that I've built around it. Let's get into it. Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. In case you don't know me, my name is Fiona and I'm a visual artist. And on this channel, I like to take you with me on my artistic journey, whether that means working on projects here in my studio, going out to see art exhibits, buying art supplies and sharing my haul with you, basically any art related content. So if that sounds like something you're into, please like and subscribe. It is one free click for you, but makes a big difference for my channel, and it would really be appreciated. So I've been running my art business for the last 6 years, and I've learned a few things along the way. So I decided to do a series called The Business of Being an Artist, where I answer some of the most common questions that I get about being an artist and having an art business, in hopes they'll help you along on your own artistic journey. All right, friends, we are gonna sit back and get comfy for this one because it's going to be personal, it's going to be a bit long, potentially a bit rambly, but I feel before we get into my art practice and art business and how my illness has impacted that and what my creative routine looks like now, I think it's important to talk about my diagnosis journey. So, trigger warning for anybody that maybe has medical PTSD, that we are going to be talking about illness, doctor's appointments, and treatments. So let's get into it. So reflecting back on my life, the first time I experienced what I've come to know now as a flare was when I was 16 years old. I had really wanted to try American kickboxing classes and convinced my parents to let me do it, and I was really excited. But after a few classes, I noticed I started having pain, stiffness, and swelling in my kneecaps. I vividly remember limping into school one day, and it was that feeling of a high school, right? Everyone's at their lockers, the bell rings, everyone's rushing to get to their classes, everyone's chatting, and I am just moving at a snail's pace, and I have to go to my locker, empty out my backpack, and get to my first class. And I'm limping along. The bell has already passed rung. I'm late for class, and my class is on the second floor. And I go to the staircase, and I look, and I realize I can't climb up the stairs. The pain is too severe in my knees. I literally can't climb the staircase. So my mom gets a phone call saying Fiona skipped class that morning, and she confronts me about it, and I tell her what's going on with my knees, and she says, all right, that's it, we're going to take you to the doctor. So the doctor said, you are clearly a young, healthy person. It has to be from the kickboxing. So stop the kickboxing classes and just start icing your knees. And we had like those Dixie cups, and we would fill it with water and put it in the freezer. And then when they were frozen, I just kind of peel the top off and use it to rub my kneecaps. And I remember it being uncomfortable and painful, and it would give me a little bit of relief, but I had that pain and swelling and the stiffness in my kneecaps for, I would say, a good few weeks. And when it did get better, I had already quit kickboxing. From then on, this kind of became a similar cycle in my life. I would feel fine for a while, and then all of a sudden, something would pop up. And I would go see doctors for whatever I thought specifically the problem was. And to be honest, these doctors were just making it up. For instance, several times throughout my life, I've had my ankle swell up like a baseball, and I've not done anything specific to injure it. But every time I've gone to a doctor, they'll say, oh, well, were you doing anything? Were you running? And running was a part of my fitness at that time. So I would say, yeah, I mean, I went for a run maybe 2 or 3 days ago, and they're like, oh, well, that's what it is. You're just clumsy. And I would end up in an ankle wrap, or when it got more extreme, I would be put in a boot. I'd have to go to physical therapy. And it was kind of just chalked up to like, you're clumsy. I'd have repeat eye infections, which I would have to take off of work to treat. And eventually the doctors would see it in my chart and they're like, wow, you get eye infections a lot. You're very unhygienic. And then I noticed that I started having such severe back pain, they would wake me up in the night. And I got to a point where pretty much every night I would have to get out of bed and I would have to do laps around my coffee table before I could lay back down because of how severe the back pain was. And I was desperate to get this fixed. I went to physical therapists, I went to chiropractors. I remember I went to the most highly rated chiropractor in New York City, paid out of pocket for this guy's expertise, just for him to do his treatments on me. And when I felt no relief, and I told him this, he said, well, you just have bad posture. I would also either get from doctors that I'm overweight or that I'm underweight. And my weight would fluctuate a lot because if I was having a flare that affected my stomach, I wouldn't want to eat and I would lose a bunch of weight. And then once I felt better and I could eat, I would binge eat and overcompensate because I didn't know the next time it would be that I wouldn't be able to eat. And the real joy of that, of eating, was taken away throughout my life because of this. So as I said, this was very cyclical. Doctors weren't really giving me answers. I personally did not have any idea that there was something systemically wrong. Something would pop up and I'd go get it fixed. So I didn't know to do any more exploration. There was no family history of illness in my family. Flash forward to July 4th of 2014. As I said, there was kind of these cyclical things between when I was 16 and at this point I was 27. I was turning 28 in 2 months from then. So I had just been going through these cycles throughout my life up until that point. But it was a fun evening and afternoon. Our friends came over. We had drinks, snacks. We could see the fireworks from the rooftop. It was just a really fun time. But the next morning, I wake up and I have a searing pain in my right eye. And when I go to open the blinds, when the light hits it, I can't see out of my right eye. So I yell for my partner at the time who comes running in and I say, I can't see out of my right eye. I'm having this searing pain. And he says, okay, we're going to go to the urgent care. So we got ourselves together. And I remember walking down the street to the urgent care and not being able to use my right eye. It was really, really scary. And when I got to the urgent care, it didn't get much better because the doctor looked at me and said, well, you have something called uveitis, which is inflammation of the eye, which happens sometimes. It's pretty rare in younger people, but it happens. But with that said, you really need to get to an eye doctor to have them look at it because if left untreated, you could go blind. And this scared this scared the heck out of me. Unfortunately, since it was 4th of July weekend, no doctor's offices were open. So the urgent care doctor did give me steroid drops to use to kind of hold me over, but said that I need to obviously see a professional for treatment. So I went home and just kind of had anxiety all weekend. And then, the morning of when things were opening back up, I remember just like, I had looked up a few doctor's offices to call, and the one nearest to me, it's like they opened at 8 a.m. and it's like I was up at 5 a.m. and like sitting by my phone, like watching, waiting for 8 a.m. to hit. And so I call the office and I say, I've been told by an urgent care that I have uveitis and it seems quite serious. Is there a way that the doctor could fit me in today? And they said, well, you're a new patient and the doctor's very, very busy. And I said, please, I've been waiting all of 4th of July weekend and I'm really scared. And the nurse or the person on the phone, the administrator, said, all right, come in and sit in the waiting room, and just whenever we can fit you in between people, we will fit you in. So my partner and I went, and you know how it is, like the first day after a holiday, it was just absolutely packed. So I actually waited 5 hours in the waiting room to get seen that day, but it was probably the best thing that I could have done because I limped into the examination room, and we'll call him Dr. A. He did a thorough exam and concluded, yep, it's uveitis. Although rare, it does happen sometimes, and we'll give you steroid drops and also dilating drops to help with the pain. But I noticed you were limping when you came in. Did you injure yourself at all? And I replied, oh, I have bad knees and ankles. I'm really clumsy. He goes, okay. Have you had any other problems with your eyes? Oh yeah, I get eye infections all the time. I try my best to be hygienic, but my doctors think that I'm not the best at hygiene. Okay. Do you ever wake up in the night with back pain? And I said, oh yeah, I wake up every night with back pain, but it's okay. I get up and I go around my living room, around the coffee table for maybe about an hour, and then I can lay back down, and sometimes I can get back to sleep. But, I've seen all these amazing chiropractors and physical therapists, like best in the business, and they've all been convinced it's because I just have really bad posture, and I'm really trying hard to work on my posture and make it better. So he's nodding and taking notes. Do you have pain anywhere else? And so then I show him my index finger, and I'm like, yeah, it's really swollen and stiff. Like I couldn't bend it at that point. And I showed it to him, and he took a look at it, and he's like, uh-huh. And I'm like, I work a lot on computers and I draw a lot. I'm just repeating back to this doctor everything that I have been told. And, he's nodding and taking notes. So at this point, he pauses and he looks at me and he says, so everything that these doctors have told you could be true, but I have another patient who has an autoimmune condition where they have a lot of the similar symptoms that you have. And just for peace of mind, let's do a bit of blood work and see if it shows anything. I agreed, not really thinking anything of it. I had never heard of an autoimmune disease. I didn't know anybody with any of these conditions. There was no history of it in my family. So I just thought, sure, we'll just get some blood work done. No big deal, whatever. He said to come back in a week and he'll check to see how the steroids are doing with the uveitis. So I made my appointment for the following week and I left. A week later, I walked back into the examination room. The uveitis was starting to clear up, and he took a look and said, oh, that's great. The treatment is working. Then he says to me, so your blood work came back. God, I can't do this still. I've been diagnosed for 11 years and it's still like this, telling the story. This is a difficult part in the story. Okay, I could do this. So he says your blood work came back and you are positive for a genetic marker called HLA-B27. And this is a marker that we tend to see in people with this autoimmune condition that I think that you may have. But you will need to see a rheumatologist to get a proper diagnosis. He then recommended a local rheumatologist who is also a good friend of his for me to see. So we made an appointment. At the time, I didn't really know what this meant. I didn't know anyone with an autoimmune disease, and I honestly remember thinking, oh, cool. Maybe there's a reason why all this stuff has been happening to me over the years, and they can give me a pill and I will get better. I remember walking down the street after the appointment and calling my parents and telling them, and they had never heard of anything like this either. So a week later, I went to my first rheumatologist appointment with Dr. G, and he asked me a bunch of similar questions to Dr. A. He did an examination. He asked me about the back pain, the stiffness in the joints, the eye problems. Told him my whole history, all the mystery problems and all the things that doctors had told me over the years. So we go sit down in his office and he says, you have a genetic condition called undifferentiated spondyloarthropathy. It's an autoimmune condition. And no, you aren't clumsy. You aren't unhygienic. And it doesn't have to do with your weight. And it's not in your head. You have a very real disease. And I just remember crying like I'm crying now. Because I felt relief to know that I wasn't imagining these things over all the years. But I was also scared because I didn't know what this meant. It's always weird to like think back and try and tell this story because knowing what I know now and how much this disease has changed my life significantly, it's just very emotional. So I know there's a lot of you out there that either know someone or yourself goes through this. So it's hard. Okay, we're back. We took a little break, not only for me, but for my overheating camera. So now we can get back into how this diagnosis impacted my art practice, and that's because I actually credit this diagnosis journey with getting me back into art. I worked a 9 to 6, so I was just exhausted after that, and I was already very fatigued from my disease running rampant all those years with no treatment. And when I would get home, I would have to climb 4 flights to get up to my apartment. So when I was home, I was pretty much homebound at the time. Also, I'm not sure if you've been through a diagnosis journey, but you get the diagnosis, but then you have to go to tons of doctor's appointments, procedures, get tests, all of this stuff to see how far your disease has progressed since it had just been running rampant up until your diagnosis. So during that time at home, I really got back into drawing and painting. And over the years between art school, which I graduated in 2007, up until that diagnosis in 2014, I was not showing work. I wasn't even really working outside a sketchbook. I had a very good sketchbook practice. I would draw quite often in it, but I wasn't applying to shows or showcasing it or exhibits. I wasn't sharing it with friends and family. I wasn't selling it. It was purely just a sketchbook practice for me to enjoy as a hobby. But it was actually this time at home that triggered me to begin a body of work outside of my sketchbook. So I went into those sketchbooks from the years between 2007 to 2014, and I actually started cutting them up and collaging them onto a canvas. And this was a rather large canvas. I think it was about 5 feet tall by maybe 3 feet wide. But it was significant, and I collaged all those sketches like into the middle of it, and then I started painting around it and doing more marks around all the sketchbook work I had in the middle of it. And I remember working on my kitchen island because it was such a large piece. There was just nowhere else in my apartment to work on it. And after I was done with that, I actually decided to create additional drawings that would go with it, and it would be a cohesive body of work. And that was my first time doing that since art school. It was also at this time that I decided to start an Instagram where I could showcase these drawings and paintings I had been working on. So about after a year after getting diagnosed, I had been going through different treatment plans, but I finally got on a medication that would work, and it wouldn't put me into remission, but at least I was able to like sleep through the night without the back pain. The uveitis was completely gone, and it tampered things, all the disease activity down. And the unfortunate thing is the medication was in injection form, and I would have to self-inject. So I hated needles. In fact, I mean, I still don't like them, but I was afraid of them. So the idea of having to inject myself, I really had to hype myself up. And I ended out coming up with sort of a Saturday morning routine for myself. So I would get up Saturday morning, I would have an iced coffee, inject myself, and then I would plan my Instagram posts for the week where I would have my 7 drawings. So sometimes it was a hand drawing, sometimes it was a digital drawing over photography that I would take in and around the city. But I know during my work week, I didn't have time to be making posts every day. So I would sit down on that Saturday after my injection and I would make my art that I could share for the week. As a result of those posts, I actually started to get contacted by fellow artists in New York saying, hey, I'm putting on a show. Do you want to participate? And I remember it would be like in the basement of a bar, and you would give them maybe like $5 to $20 depending on how many pieces you wanted to show, and they'd say, grab a wall space and wherever you can find a nail that's already in the wall, hang up your stuff. And you would just hang your things up, and then other people would come and you just get to look at other people's art. And it was literally happening in bar basements and things like that. But I did a bunch of these like pay to play ones where you would meet with other people in the community and just other artists just trying to get their work out there and show it through whatever means are necessary. And it was quite good because I built up my resume at the time. I, hadn't had any shows since 2007, 2008. So there was a big gap in my artist resume. So I sort of filled it with these shows. And then I remember I got to a point where there was one that said, hey, come show your work in this loft space in Soho, and we're going to give you like 10 feet of space, and it's going to be a group show. There's going to be a bunch of us, and you get to do whatever you want. And I remember like friends and family came out. Some of them bought work, and it was just really fun. And it was like my first official art show in New York City where I had like a big wall to show my work. But my disease was still happening at that time, but it was more under control through the medication that I was taking. So it wasn't like I was in a constant flare, but I would just have, occasional little flare-ups here and there. So those early days, I really credit my illness with getting me back into an intentional art practice. But let me be clear, my illness has also took a lot of away from my art practice. So I have limits to how much I can work physically because I get tired, and if I overwork, the inflammation will ramp up. But with that said, I have a lot of deadlines, so a lot of the time I do overwork and pay the price for it. Even today, as I record this, I am having a bit of costochondritis, which is inflammation of the chest plate, which is quite painful. And it's because I was glazing furiously for days for an upcoming art fair. And I had that deadline, so I overworked. So it's hard to still gauge these things. I know, I knew this week doing that this is likely going to happen, right? And if I had planned better, I would have not had to do that. But here we are, and my body can't quite keep up with what it is that as an artist I want to do. Also, funny enough, I find myself saying yes to things a lot more because I refuse to let my disease hold me back. It's almost in spite of it that I overdo things. But I also know I overwork because I don't know the next time I will be in pain or have a flare or be bedridden, and that time will come out of my art practice. It's almost like if you're an able-bodied person and you have sick days, right? Just imagine that, but it happens more consistently in your month and in your weeks. So if it was like I got sick once or twice a year and I had to take off, I probably wouldn't work as vigorously. But knowing I can have a good day and then immediately have a bad day, on those good days, I work, and I admittedly do overdo it. I mean, even talking about time, the time that I have to spend going to doctor's appointments, getting tests or procedures, this is all taking away time that I could be using towards my art practice. I'll also say another way it's impacted my practice is sometimes it makes it difficult to build an art community. Even just from a social standpoint, I have an invisible illness, so people will look at me and not be able to tell. So people that don't know me, it's not like I introduce myself and say, hi, I'm Fiona, I have a chronic illness. And even at that, a lot of people have never heard of spondyloarthropathy. They have no concept of what it is and how it would actually affect my day-to-day. So people that don't know me very well, that maybe I meet at an art opening or exhibition, or if I'm trying to get to know a group of artists, if I flake out because I have to cancel because of my illness, people just have a different perception of you. And the idea that I always try to have a home studio. I tried once to have a studio outside my home, and my production just went way down because me having it in the home just makes it so much more accessible to me. Just having this debilitating illness to have to then commute to an outside studio and bring supplies back and forth, and then I have to make sure I'm doing it in a window where I feel okay, but then if I don't feel okay by afternoon, it's like it gets kind of weird to have a studio outside my home. So when I did have a studio outside it, I found that most days I ended up just walking out of my bedroom in my pajamas to my studio at home and next door. And renting that studio space was pretty much me tossing away money. But the advantage to it is they would have open studio events, and, you know, it was so nice to have a community of other artists there because I have a very solitary practice. And once again, this disease can be very isolating. So then the fact that I'm not out there in a studio space where other artists can pop in, you can get feedback, you can talk. It's like I have to work extra hard to build and then maintain those relationships. Also, the medication that I'm on makes me immune compromised. So especially during these times, I might be at an event and wearing a mask, and especially at art fairs, I hate to say it, but I notice that people are less likely to approach you now wearing a mask and may not want to engage, and they might not want to engage with you in conversations about your work and the price of things and want to buy it because they might look at you like you're sick because you're wearing a mask, but I'm really wearing it to just try to protect myself. So it's like an odd juxtaposition because I know it's the right thing to do to protect myself, but I'll admit I've gone to quite a few art fairs recently, and then I've ended out getting COVID or the flu or something because I want to be like everybody else and not wear a mask and just enjoy it. And then I always end up getting sick after. The other thing that's interesting about having spondyloarthropathy is it is a disability, and that means that I could apply for disability grants, or I've participated in shows that are specifically centered around artists with disability. And that's an interesting thing to change your self-perception around yourself, and also my perspectives in general on the art world and where disability fits in there. I mean, my illness in general has completely changed my perspective on disability in society in general, but just speaking from an art perspective, the fact that there's opportunities for artists with disability is encouraging, and I'm grateful that there is that space for us. And I do hope that it is something that can continue to prosper and grow, because I think disabled artists have a very interesting and different perspective to share with the world. And then lastly, I'll say my disease has definitely impacted my art practice from a standpoint of I need to ask for help and knowing my limits. For instance, if I know I have a show coming up, I cannot commit to hanging that myself. I either need to hire help or find friends or family that are willing to help me, because I've done this now long enough that I know I cannot do it on my own. I physically cannot do it. So it's a hard thing to admit, but it's the truth, and it is hard to ask for help sometimes. Okay, so we've done the diagnosis journey. We've talked about how it's impacted my art practice, and I would love to hear from any of you artists as well, how chronic illness has maybe impacted your art practice. But now we're going to talk about building a creative routine. And by the way, I think building a creative routine can apply to anybody. So the idea in general of like, how do we build a creative routine around something that's so spontaneous, creative art making? You can't make that into a routine, can you? So if you take a moment to think about it, you probably already have a bit of a creative routine that you use to make your work. So let me share mine with you. And I'm going to laugh having to explain this because probably a lot of you watch the studio vlogs or you've seen my day in the life videos, but hear me out. This is maybe for the folks that aren't so familiar. So my art making routine consists of making something most days, whether it is a painting or working with clay or editing videos for YouTube. And with that said, I'm not going to say it's like every day because I do try to take rest days and breaks as I need it. But in general, most days I will wander into my studio after Zelda has been fed and walked and I have had some breakfast myself. I have a coffee or a matcha. And I look at what I've created the previous days and that usually leads me to where I'm going to go next. Or I typically will have a deadline so I know what it is that I'm going to be working on. It isn't common for me to jump between pieces, although it's been happening more and more recently because of deadlines. I keep talking about deadlines. Gosh, is this a deadline video? But I tend to focus on one piece at a time, really get into a dialogue with it and see where the piece leads me. I'm somebody that works from improvisation and reacting, putting down one color at a time. And I may have ideas in my head and I might put down a layer of colors, but then as I'm working, I'm really open to changing that. And I try to treat the process pretty fluidly. So instead of going in with a really strict idea, I let the work guide me where I want it to go. And that's if I'm working on painting. If I'm working in clay, I'm usually hand building, and this is really new for me. I have done throwing on the wheel as well, but once again, I just kind of let the process lead me. I also do a lot of glazing for pieces that my mom has thrown for me. And once again, it is all spontaneous glazing and mark making. But whatever it is in terms of my work that I'm doing that morning, I will work till between noon and 1. Then Zelda needs a break, so I will let her out. She'll get her treats. I have a bit of lunch. And then I will come back into the studio. And this is the point at which if I need to do administrative work, I will do it then. It's really hard, but I try my best not to start my days with administrative emails or updating my website or anything like that. Because if I do that in the morning, that is the rest of my day. And I find I'm most creative first thing in the morning. So if I'm able to get in and do it also when the light is best in my studio, I will try my best to do that first thing. I also find in general, I have a harder time getting into creative flow at the end of the day. I usually like to rest. And as someone with a chronic illness, my energy is highest when I wake up, which is still not, what it is for an able-bodied person. Like if you have 10 spoons, I'm probably starting most of my days on a good day at like a 6 or 7. And then some days it's like I'm starting at a 4. So just realistically, the amount of energy that I have, it wavers day to day, but I tend to find that it's higher in the morning. But with that said, if I've had a rough night and I haven't slept, I will sleep in the morning, and then I might work in the evening. You've also seen videos of me on this channel where I am up at night and I'm working on something because I have that creative itch and I'm unable to sleep. So I do just try to work around the illness in that regard. But with that said, if I am able to work in the morning, the studio light in here is chef's kiss. Also, just quickly to say, I am also an inbox zero girly. If you don't know what that is, Google inbox zero. I am absolutely mad about keeping my emails to a low, and quite often on a basis, I will have 0 in my inbox. So I am like highly organized about my email inbox. I don't know why. It is just something that I do. I also find that if I'm going to be doing applications, it's easier to do in the afternoon. So like I said, when I come back from lunch, it's kind of administrative email time for me. But if I don't have that to do, I will go back into my creative practice and I will work until 5 because that is when Zelda needs her dinner. And funny talking about my chronic illness impacting my life and my creative practice, having Zelda has impacted it in such a positive way because me taking breaks for lunch and for dinner is because of her. I used to just like work through my day and would not even have a concept of time. So she's really good at making sure that her mommy is taking breaks and I am taking care of myself. So throughout my day, I will have podcasts on, audiobooks, music. I might chat with friends or family. Sometimes people call me up and I'll just have a wee chat while I'm working, but that's generally my day-to-day. And in terms of my routine, if I'm coming in and I don't have a body of work that I'm working on, which is pretty rare that I don't have work that's in progress or a deadline, I decide what medium I feel like working in, whether that's paint or clay, and then I will clean up and set up the space for that before I settle into it. And just because of my illness, I'll try to make sure I position stuff close to me. So I don't want to say I'm like limiting my movement, but just as little energy as I have to burn is always a good thing. Like, our ceramic kiln and wheel and everything is in the basement, and my studio is on the second floor. So when I have to go up and down between those, I have like a tray that I'll use to put a bunch of stuff on so that I'm not burning so much energy bringing so much stuff up and downstairs. Just little things like that. So does my creative routine always work? No, but I'm a big believer in just like make, and usually make a bunch of bad stuff and then you'll have some good stuff. I go into this in last week's video, so you should definitely check that out if you haven't. But because of my chronic illness, it can be very healing and relieving to make work and to just get out those emotions. I have made work specifically about my illness, and just finding joy in the work, in that day-to-day, despite the struggles, has been really motivating for me, and it's given me a lot of purpose. But if you're someone with chronic illness and you see someone like me and you're like, how is she so productive? Because that's what I get for a lot from people is how do you do it? And I'm very fortunate that this is what I'm doing full time. And even before it was that, it was just finding those spots to carve it in, because that's what I wanted to spend my free time doing, because of how relieving the art making process is for me, when it would be very easy to just crawl into bed and just not get out. But never ever let somebody else put pressure on you or make you feel that you're not doing enough. It's really, really important as an artist and someone with chronic illness that you go at your own pace. And I know I probably am a big hypocrite because, as I said, I overdo it all the time. But please just go at your own pace, make the work that you're able to, that you want to, and however long that takes you is okay. And just know that your work is valuable. Now tell me about you. Do you have a creative routine? Do you think it's even important? Do you have maybe a favorite snack or a favorite drink? You know, for me, it's my matcha. What is it about your creative routine that you would like to share with us? Because whether you have chronic illness or not, I would love to hear about it. And I just want to say a very big, heartfelt, genuine thank you if you've made it this far into the video and you've heard my story and how it's impacted me. And I do genuinely hope that for all those artists with chronic illness who have asked me this about how it's impacted my art practice and my creative routine, that this gives you a bit of insight and just lets you have comfort in knowing that, you know what, I don't have it all figured out, but we do keep making work because we have a really unique gift to share, and we should do that regardless of our illnesses. But thank you very much for hearing my story. And as always, feel free to send me any questions that you may have, because I might answer in a future video. But for now, I will see you next Friday. Until then, stay well and stay inspired, my friends. Bye.